So this is sort of an average, below average-ish opening hand. We have 3 mana worth of stuff to do. I kept it because we can make a relatively strong turn one play in Quasali Pride Mage, but now that I see that we are playing against Eldrazi, we're like clearly not the aggro. We don't want to be playing out our 2 drops. And this turn is realistically the only turn we're going to get to play our Life from Loam. It'll be sort of too late at any other stage of the game. So I just take the opportunity now to draw 2 cards. I get the sense that on every turn after this, I'll want to be using my mana to the fullest extent to be sort of competing on the board. Or potentially I'll be, say, cycling this Horizon Canopy to draw into action. So that's why I use the Life of the Loam here. I imagine I could then, say, play out Pride Mage, trade it, and then go to the Scavenging Ooze. That's how I could spend my next couple of turns. But that's not to be, because my opponent plays a Thought-Knot Seer. Now here I'm thinking, well, if they take Quasali Pride Mage, that means they have an artifact, because sort of in the blind, Scavenging Ooze is just better, right? I'm not going to be counterattacking. The opponent's way more aggressive than I am right now. So I'm expecting the opponent to take Scavenging Ooze, but they take Pride Mage, thinking, and now I'm thinking maybe they do have an artifact they're trying to protect. Now, these decks sometimes play Umzawa Sute. That might be one of the cards that they're trying to protect with this play. I mean, it might be Chalice, but that's kind of not neither here nor there. That would be a mistake on my opponent's part. Now I draw Punishing Fire, which is like quite lucky for me because now I can for sure kill the Eldrazi Mimic, and then if my opponent has sort of petered out, which I mean they probably haven't, but if we can safely take 2 hits from the Thought-Knot Seer, I can use the same Punishing Fire to kill that as well. And meanwhile, I can also use the Scavenging Ooze to eat the Mimic. Unfortunately, my opponent has this Reality Smasher, and this game has really gone downhill. I mean, we started out relatively weak, and it's only gotten worse. I refrained from activating the Grove at the most convenient time, just because I didn't want to have it have the Punishing Fire in my hand during my opponent's main phase, for fear of another Thought-Knot Seer. So now we're down to 6, and there's 3 threats. We can kill the Mishra's Factory, chump block the Thought-Knot Seer. We're still taking 5. We're living just barely, and this Chalice is really not helping. So there's, I'm not seeing a way that we can survive meaningfully, right? If we play out the Scavenging Ooze, use the Punishing Fire, then we're at 1 and there's still 2 threats the next turn. If we had drawn a Wasteland, we'd be like no, we'd still be in an awful shape because we're still at 1 because we're still forced to jump block. Well, we'd be at 2. Right, so this game is basically lost. I think I might wait until I wait 1 more turn just to see what's up. And my opponent shows me another Reality Smasher. At that point, there's really nothing to do but concede. Okay, so our sideboard's like fairly simple for this. We want all 3 of our Swords of Plowshares. We really don't want the Chalices. Then we also want 2 Toxic Deluge for sure. And then we might want Marin, Garrick, and Reclamation Sage. Sort of in that order of desirability. Reclamation Sage, there like may or may not be targets for it, but if we have a Quasali Pride Mage, that generally accounts for most of the things we might want to remove. Here I think I'm cutting a Punishing Fire just because there's not a ton of small creatures that we care about in that deck. I'm trying to make room for stuff. Here I think I would prefer the Marin instead of the Garruk. Marin has a large-ish body that the non-problematic creatures can't get past, and it regrows our knights, which tend to get dismembered. Uh, it also forms a permanent chump blocker with Dryad Arbor, which if the opponent has just Thought Knot or non Reality Smasher creatures, is pretty good. Garruk creates 2/2s, which are also infinite chump blockers, but it's particularly weak to Reality Smasher because that'll just get rid of Garruk entirely. Whereas Marin versus Smasher, I can always take a couple hits and figure out some way to beat the situation. And this hand is it's pretty decent. It has 3 mana a Wasteland, which is always good in this matchup. We have one threat, one good threat, one decent threat, one good answer, and then a Green Zenith for probably a hopefully a night if we can last that long. Um, so I'm feeling good about this hand. Our opening play, I like either we could play out just a Scavenging Ooze, but we do something like play Stirring Wildwood's tapped, and then Swords plus Wasteland next turn, or Wasteland, use Mox Diamond to power out a Scavenging Ooze is also an option. I think I prefer to just right now. I would play a Stirring Wildwood, but seeing as this is a recorded game, I choose to be a little bit more proactive and play out a Scavenging Ooze. The upside to the incentive to playing just the Wildwood is if the game goes long enough, that's a manland that we might want to play. It's relatively rare that these games go much longer than sort of the point at which that starts being useful. So I think I made a mistake here. I was trying to wasteland my opponent, but I had already played the Savannah. So I guess I'm just left to keep up swords. Um, in general, I'm not the biggest fan of destroying the legendary land. I'd rather go after all the temples, but in this situation, um, I think it's fine not to wasteland and save the mana to get a knight. And here, my opponent doesn't really have anything, right? It's just a Matter Reshaper. Could have been way worse. After a little bit of thought, I decide to kill the Matter Reshaper. My opponent doesn't get a trigger, which is nice. I'm wasting premium removal on non-premium creatures, but I also get to negate like the bigger upside of that creature. And now I would really be tempted to use Wasteland because my opponent has shown they have nothing good at 4 mana. Otherwise, they would have led with a better creature. So right now, I would just Wasteland and attack for 2. But it's also quite reasonable to sort of play around whatever they might have by getting out a knight here. And I think that's what I do here. And so the upside of this is, okay, so my opponent gets 1 turn of free reign to play a smasher or whatever. But after that, I can just wasteland them twice, and they're not going to be playing any more Smashers. There's sort of a tendency on my part to want to play to not you really need to like align how defensive you want to play with your opponent's hand, and seeing as how my opponent hadn't yet put me in a bad situation, I could definitely afford to take one turn off, give them the Smasher, and now I imagine I'm going to wasteland once or twice. And then I'm even in a damage race that's not too bad for me. Of course, I wouldn't want to. I might not want to actually be in a damage race. So if I have a 4/4 knight on defense, my opponent can't attack. And here my opponent tries to foolishly dismember my knight. So it's going to survive as a 1/1, and my opponent gets to do 5 more damage to me. I would argue that that's not worth the card. I do my math, double check it just because there's no reason to be off by 1 here and lose a knight. But I can in fact just fetch up a wasteland and waste my opponent. And there's like some question about which land I get rid of, because my opponent has demonstrated that on 4 mana they have nothing, and after a couple of draws they might get a Thought Knot Seer, but the cavern is the opponent's only source of like non-Eldrazi mana, so I do target it. So perhaps to this way, with a cavern, my opponent can set up a situation where they dismember my knight after it already blocked a Reality Smasher, and I might not have enough, and I probably won't have enough to pump it past both of those things. Right? It would need to be a 10/10 to survive all that, or a 9/9 to trade. Is it minus? It's -5, so never mind. Actually, that's really not happening. Um, and I leave them with Hayabugan because I'm seeing that there's also not a great mana situation unless my opponent plays a land this turn, right? It looks like I've already ran them out of mana, and here I miss a point of damage with the Punishing Fire, which is unlikely to matter. I'm probably thinking to whether or not I want to leave the knight on defense, which I probably do. And right, I'm playing this Tranquil Thicket tap because next turn if I draw a land, I want to get another knight to really seal this game up. Yeah, okay. There's no reason to want to get to low life against Eldrazi. They can have like random, really explosive cards. Like if they play an Ancient Tomb and have a Simian Spirit Guide, they can create 5 more damage out of nowhere. So even if we're winning a race, that math can change really quickly. So this Matter Reshaper would prevent my Scavenging Ooze from attacking, so I want to kill it, and I guess we'll see what comes out of it. Eldrazi Mimic. Right. And this is another card I can kill with Punishing Fire, which is perfectly fine. But here I should just play Knight, right? The worst case scenario is my opponent has another Reality Smasher, so they get to attack with 15 power worth of creatures. I kill two of them, chump block with, or just take 5. I go to 5, and then my opponent is left with just Eldrazi Mimic. So even that worst case scenario is not that bad for me. I don't want to attack with my Knight because my opponent can then just double block, and they're in a better position than I would be that way. Right? These Knights are only going to get better, regardless of what my opponent is able to do. My Knights will very likely be able to beat it in most situations. Whereas if I just lost a Knight there are potentially some uh, lines where my opponent might be winning. Anyway, I now choose to attack with it, figuring let's not be that conservative. My opponent just takes it because they can, and they concede, seeing the writing on the wall. And now I turn my attention back to Marin, which uh, I have was the go-to card to bring in before I had both Marin and Garruk, and I don't want to remove Garruk because it's like a fine card. I'm thinking of removing Dark Confidant right now because I don't need the card advantage to win this game. I really all I need to do is stick a Knight, and Bob is great in that he draws me 2 Knights, but I don't need to pay life for cards. In fact, I wouldn't pay cards for life, but I would pay cards for not dying as fast, right? Like I'm looking for cards like Swords of Plowshares rather than cards like Dark Confidant. In the end, I just missed what I did, but I think I kept with my Bob, which is uh, probably what I'd do in the end here anyway. Um, Either decision is probably fine. If I thought a little bit longer about it, I might have. Oh, this is okay. So here I'm sweating, hoping my opponent didn't pick Wasteland because I kept this hand entirely based on Wasteland. Um, I don't know if I would keep a hand like this in a sanction game. And my opponent names Mox Diamond. Literally anything else would have been better because, of course, Mox Diamond isn't an activated ability; it's a mana ability. And I decide that since I have 3 Wastelands, there's no use being subtle about it. I'm just going to hit my opponent over the head with these Wastelands uh, until a better game plan comes along. Right here, basically, I'm usually really not a fan of the turn 1 Wasteland because it's sort of a gamble. I'm saying, hey, I have more Wastelands than you have mana, or after these Wastelands, whatever you have done meanwhile, I'll be able to do better stuff afterwards. Right? If my opponent had played let's say a Delver on turn 1, that would be an awful play, right? I take the game back to nothing, but they have a Delver. Instead of a Delver, they have a Pithy Needle and an Eldrazi Mimic, which is basically nothing. So I'm happy to do it right now. But as you can see, I obviously have nothing of my own to show here. And here I'm thinking, you know what, maybe I should start actually playing the game. And I green sent for Dryad Arbor, and now I'm ahead of my opponent basically in all practical ways on the board. Right, I have more mana, I have a better creature. My opponent is unable to play any of their 4 or 5 drops, right? Those are the only cards that we really care about. None of their 2 or 3 drops actually matter to us, besides like maybe Umazawa Jiti or something. But that's a 4 mana play as well. So as long as my opponent was limited to 3 mana, so they're limited to like something relatively unimpressive. And here I get to sort of rub it in my opponent's face that they are using Pithy Needle wrong. I'm thinking of throwing away land to Mox Diamond so I can Wasteland, play a Bob, and Swords the Matter Reshaper, which I think is the best line here. I mean, I can also Green Sun Zenith for a Knight. This deck gives a lot of options, but right, I'm sort of counting all the mana for this play. But yeah, I think the what is this? It seems that my opponent. Oh no, I disconnected. That's what it is, and I'm struggling a little bit with the new UI to figure out how I can reconnect. This is my uh, one of the first games I was playing in X-Mage with this UI. Right. So about Knight. I mean, generally, so this would put what was it? 3 lands in the graveyard, making the Knight a 5/5. I kind of want to wait to deploy Knight until it is at least a 6/6 to survive Dismember. Because sticking a Knight is often the difference between winning and losing a game. I'd rather use up my other tools and make sure the Knight that I do end up playing is going to stick. And here my opponent is again limited on mana, but they do have a Warping Wail to answer my Dark Confidant, which I'm again totally fine with. These are sort of throwaway threats, and I'm keeping the real stuff in my hand. And now the play, at least before this draw step, is to just green sun for Knight, and I don't think Punishing Fire changes anything at all. Knight invalidates Eldrazi Mimic just as well as Punishing Fire does, although I actually think that I wouldn't block in this situation, specifically playing around Dismember. Now this is the first chance in a while that my opponent has to cobble together 4 mana, should they have another land. But considering I took away 3 of their lands, 2 of them being 2 mana lands, if I remember correctly, that's really unlikely. My opponent attacks. Let's see if past me would or would not take this block. I think it's way safer just to take 2 damage here. That's not going to win the game for me, and I have infinite ways of well, I have plenty of ways to deal with a Mimic in general. Next turn I can block it safely, or I can just Punishing Fire it, or I can trade with Dryad Arbor. There's just no reason to risk this. Although I don't remember what I did, so I might be making this mistake right now. Cool. Oftentimes I sort of I have the sense that unlike many players that I regard as good, I don't make these sorts of calculations while actually playing. And it's pleasant to know that at least in this situation I did. So now I'm killing that for I'm not entirely sure what reason. Sometimes I like to just sort of get stuff like that over with. There's probably no harm in it, but there's just no reason to kill that. I mean, it might have been an XP specific concern where if my opponent plays a creature and I sort of misclick on the trigger, I didn't want to have to deal with that. And here, I just attack. My opponent, the Eldrazi deck sometimes plays Wasteland and sometimes plays Caracas. So whereas I would normally go for Merit Leech here, it's like a little bit less safe, and I can. I've gotten my opponent to just 2 lands, so they're way more likely to draw if they play it a Wasteland or Caracas than they would something that comes up the board. And I've answered, I guess, my opponent's final castable threat, so they just give up